It was a quiet Friday night in Columbia, Missouri, the kind of night where nothing feels dangerous until it suddenly is. At 9:15 p.m., 22-year-old college senior Allison Pierce clocked out of her shift at the Maple Bean Café and stepped into the crisp October air. She wore her favorite denim jacket, backpack slung over one shoulder, and texted her roommate she'd be home soon. She never arrived. Minutes later, a gas station attendant saw her waiting at a crosswalk, glancing over her shoulder like someone was following her. That was the last confirmed sighting. Her phone went silent. Her bed stayed untouched. For 17 years, no one could explain how a young woman could vanish on a well-lit street in the middle of a college town, until a hiker stumbled across something in the woods that changed everything. This isn't just a cold case story. It's a story of persistence, science, and the voices that refuse to fade. If you believe every mystery deserves an ending, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Because tonight, we're reopening the disappearance of Allison Pierce, the 17-year mystery that wouldn't stay buried. It was a mild October evening in Columbia, Missouri, the kind of night that feels calm, safe, and familiar. The college town was alive in the usual ways, music drifting from the bars on 9th Street, students laughing outside late-night coffee shops, headlights rolling past tree-lined sidewalks. For most people, it was just another Friday. For 22-year-old Allison Pierce, it was the end of a long week. A senior psychology major at the University of Missouri, Allison was finishing her shift at the Maple Bean Café, a small student-run spot near campus where she worked part-time. Friends and co-workers described her as punctual and steady, someone who kept to routines and never missed a shift. That night, she wiped down the counter, counted her register, and signed out on the cafe log at 9:03 p.m. She told a co-worker she planned to catch the Broadway bus, the same one she took almost every night. She slipped her tips into an envelope, zipped up her faded denim jacket, and slung a canvas backpack over her shoulder. The last camera to capture her showed her at 9:15 p.m., stepping out of the cafe door and waving to a friend who shouted goodnight. That short video, just a few seconds long, would later become one of the most replayed clips in Missouri true crime history. Allison's walk home should have taken about 20 minutes. She started east on 9th Street, passing familiar storefronts, an antique bookstore, a pizza place, a closed thrift shop. Between 9:17 and 9:25 p.m., she appeared briefly on 3 security cameras along the block. After that, the trail began to fade. A witness at a nearby Broadway gas station later told investigators he saw a young woman matching Allison's description waiting at a crosswalk, looking over her shoulder more than once, as if she thought someone might be following her. Another passerby recalled a man in a tan jacket standing a few yards behind her. The description was vague, and in 2004 there were no high-definition cameras, no social media trails, and no GPS tracking from phones. By 9:40 p.m., Allison's phone activity stopped. She made no calls, sent no messages, and received none. At 9:58 p.m., her roommate texted, "You home yet?" The message showed as delivered but never read. That was the last digital trace of her life. When Allison didn't come home that night, her roommate initially assumed she had stayed with a friend. But by morning, something felt wrong. Her bed was untouched, her lamp still burning beside it, and her textbooks were open on the desk where she had left them. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By 10:02 a.m., Saturday, her parents had filed a missing persons report with the Columbia Police Department. Investigators began by classifying the case as a possible runaway, a mistake that would haunt the investigation for years. They assumed she might have left voluntarily after stress or a breakup. Her family immediately rejected that theory. Allison had a full class schedule, a part-time job, and weekend plans with friends. Nothing in her life suggested she would disappear. By noon, flyers with her smiling face started appearing on campus bulletin boards, coffee shop windows, and street poles along Broadway. The photo used was from her student ID, the same denim jacket, the same quiet smile. It would become the image every local resident would soon recognize. Detectives began retracing her route, reviewing camera footage from businesses along 9th Street. The quality was poor, grainy black and white footage from analog systems that made faces nearly impossible to distinguish. The gas station footage that might have confirmed the man in the tan jacket was blurred beyond use. No license plates, no vehicle matches, and no witnesses who saw her enter a car. The distance from the Maple Bean Café to her apartment was 1.1 miles, a straight, well-lit route. It should have been a 22-minute walk, one officer said later. You could make it before your coffee cooled. But somewhere along that route, Allison vanished. There were no screams reported, no broken belongings found, no signs of a struggle. She was there, and then she wasn't. That realization hit the community hard. Columbia wasn't the kind of place where young women simply disappeared. Parents called the police to check on their daughters. Students traveled in pairs. Shop owners started checking their security cameras daily, even when nothing happened. The sense of safety that had always surrounded the university began to crack. Allison's parents drove in from Kansas City that afternoon. Her mother began calling hospitals across the region. None had admitted anyone matching her description. Her father spoke at the first press conference outside the police station, his voice steady, but exhausted. She didn't run away, he said. Someone took her. That single sentence would become the family's rallying cry for years. Friends and classmates organized their own search efforts. They walked the sidewalks she had taken, filmed short clips on their phones, hoping someone might recognize a face in the background. They retraced the route past the Maple Bean Café, down Broadway, through the small park near the intersection. Nothing surfaced. Police expanded the search radius and canvassed nearby businesses for receipts, camera footage, and employee logs. No one remembered seeing Allison after 9:25 p.m. By Sunday night, the Columbia Daily Tribune published the headline, "University Student Missing. Last seen Friday near 9th Street." Within days, every household in the area had seen her photo. The case quickly gained statewide attention, but without leads, it began to stall. The official disappearance window was 9:15 to 9:40 p.m., and beyond that, there was nothing but silence. Investigators admitted privately that they had no clear direction. A detective later recalled, "It's like she walked into the air. Everything normal, then gone." In the background of all this activity, Allison's friends were left replaying her final text messages, wondering if they had missed something. Her roommate told reporters she kept calling the phone every few hours just to hear it ring. It felt like hope, she said, until it didn't. As night fell on October 16th, the town of Columbia was transformed. Volunteers lit candles at the university quad, holding posters that read, "Bring Allison home." Strangers who had never met her joined the crowd, standing shoulder to shoulder in quiet disbelief. The next morning, police briefed the press again. Still no trace, no sightings, no clues. But what they did have was a timeline, a stretch of pavement, and a gap in time that made no sense. The chief summed it up in one line that stuck with every reporter. A 22-minute walk turned into a 17-year mystery. And as the camera faded on that first desperate weekend, the narrator's final words echoed over empty streets and flickering streetlights. Within 24 hours, the streets of Columbia would fill with volunteers, cameras, and fear, as a quiet college town realized one of their own was gone. By Saturday morning, Columbia was no longer the quiet college town it had been just 2 days earlier. Police had officially declared Allison Pierce an endangered missing person. Her photo, smiling, denim jacket, brown hair tucked behind one ear, flashed across every local TV station, campus website, and Facebook feed. The streets around the University of Missouri, normally buzzing with weekend students, now felt tense. Flyers covered the coffee shops and street lamps. Every conversation began with the same question. Did you hear about that missing student? A temporary command post went up on 9th Street, just a block from the Maple Bean Café, where Allison had last been seen. Patrol cars blocked the street corners, and officers briefed volunteers on search grids drawn across a city map. Within hours, dozens of students, firefighters, and local residents were walking through fields, woods, and alleys, calling her name into the wind. By noon, K-9 units had joined the effort. The dogs followed her scent from the cafe door toward Broadway, stopping abruptly near a narrow side street. Investigators marked the spot. It looked as if she had stepped off the sidewalk and into a car. That was the first and last trace of her path. Dive teams searched Stevens Lake Park and the edges of the Missouri River for 2 days straight. Nothing surfaced. Officers went door to door along the route she should have walked home, asking store owners to turn over surveillance tapes. Most didn't have digital systems, just old VHS recorders that automatically erased after a day. Each hour lost meant another piece of evidence gone forever.
Meanwhile, the Pierce family arrived in town. Her parents stood beside detectives at a press briefing, pleading for help. "Someone out there saw her," her mother said, her voice trembling. "Please, call if you know anything." That clip replayed on the news every hour. By Sunday night, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil on the Mizzou campus. Students held up printed photos of Allison, light reflecting off tears and candle flames. A hashtag Find Allison Pierce, spread across early social media, carrying her name beyond Missouri for the first time. A few witnesses came forward, each offering fragments of what might have happened. One man said he saw a young woman at a stoplight talking to someone in a tan jacket. Another said he might have seen her at a bus stop, but couldn't be sure. A tip about a white van led to a dead end. Every clue fizzled out. By Sunday night, one detective muttered, "It's like she just vanished between 2 frames of tape." Then the rumors began. Someone posted that there was a stalker on campus. Another claimed police were hiding evidence. Fear spread faster than facts. The university issued a warning, and parents flooded dorm lines begging their daughters not to walk alone. Shops around 9th Street taped signs on their doors. "Call 911 if you see her." Through those long nights, volunteers kept walking in silence, flashlights sweeping over sidewalks and storm drains. Reporters stayed camped outside the police line, broadcasting live as the city grew quieter and colder. The Pierce family refused to stop. They hired a private search team from Kansas City, dogs, drones, thermal scanners. Hundreds of people joined them, scouring every wooded area within 10 miles. A student volunteer later said, We just wanted to find something. Even her bracelet. Anything. But there was nothing to find. Late Monday night, investigators called a press meeting. They looked exhausted. The statement was short. There is currently no physical evidence that Allison left this area on her own. That single sentence changed everything. The search wasn't just for a missing person anymore. It was now a criminal investigation. Technology became the invisible wall they couldn't climb. In 2004, Columbia didn't have citywide traffic cameras or automated license plate tracking. Most stores used analog recorders, grainy footage that blurred faces into shadows. When technicians finally reached the Broadway gas station, the tape had already been recorded over. One detective said later, "If we'd gotten there 12 hours earlier, maybe we'd have seen the car. Maybe we'd have seen him." As the 48th hour passed, the hope that had fueled hundreds of searchers began to fade. Officers packed up equipment. Volunteers went home. The local news anchor ended her report with the same line repeated through the weekend. Allison Pierce, 22 years old, last seen Friday night on 9th Street. Police continue to ask for public assistance. That sentence played on every channel that night. In the Pierce family's rented motel room, the phone sat in the center of the table, volume turned high, just in case someone called. No one did. The following morning, Tuesday, Columbia looked unchanged, but everyone felt it. Students hurried to class, pretending life was normal. The rain from the night before had left the flyers damp and curling on street poles, the ink running until her name blurred into the paper. People still talked about her in cafes and buses, but quieter now, like a story too painful to say aloud. In the police department, the lead investigator, Sergeant Dale Weston, stood by the evidence board and stared at the empty stretch between 9:17 and 9:40 p.m. The 23 minutes that made no sense. He later admitted in an interview years after, "It reminded me of a case I worked back in '92. A girl about the same age, same kind of small town. She walked home after a shift and disappeared just a block from her house. We never found her. I swore I'd never let another one slip through like that." That memory, he said, was what kept the Allison Pierce case open long after the cameras stopped showing up. But in those first 48 hours, the trail was already dying. As reporters packed up, one local journalist ended her segment with words that would echo through the years. "A city searched without rest for 48 hours, but every road led back to 9th Street, empty, silent, and waiting." The case was far from over, but the first wave of hope had broken. And as Columbia tried to move forward, a darker question began to settle in everyone's mind. If Allison didn't walk home that night, then who took her there instead? By the third day, exhaustion had replaced adrenaline. The search teams that had once filled Columbia's streets now stood in silence, faces drawn, voices fading. After 72 hours with no sign of Allison Pierce, police officially shifted from search mode to investigation mode. The posters still hung on street poles, fluttering in the October wind, but volunteers were trickling home. The press began asking the question no one wanted to hear. Is it possible she just left? Her parents pushed back hard. Allison didn't run, her mother told reporters. She was taken. The first real lead came from a gas station clerk on Broadway. He told police he'd seen Allison around 9:25 that Friday night, standing at the crosswalk light. She wasn't alone. A tall, thin man in a tan jacket stood beside her, close enough that it looked like they were talking. When detectives pulled the security footage, the image was little more than static and shadow. Two blurred shapes waiting for the light to change, then gone. The media seized on the story, calling him the Tan Jacket Man. It was the first thread investigators had, and it unraveled almost immediately. A taxi driver came forward next, claiming he'd picked up a young woman and an older man near Broadway around 9:40 p.m. He remembered the girl sitting quietly, staring out the window. But when police checked his trip logs, the time and route didn't match. 2 days later, the statement was ruled irrelevant. Still, rumors spread across town that Allison had gotten into a cab with someone. Every theory, no matter how weak, became gospel in someone's mind. By week's end, police turned their attention to the first official suspect, Mark Reynolds, Allison's ex-boyfriend. He was 24, an engineering student, quiet, clean record. He was interviewed twice, willingly. His alibi was solid. He'd been home watching a football game with his roommate, who backed up the story. There were no threatening messages, no breakups, no signs of obsession. After 3 days of checking, detectives cleared him. But newspapers didn't. For weeks his name stayed in headlines, his photo printed onto the words "person of interest." Then came what locals later called the white van theory. A man phoned in a tip claiming he'd seen a white van circling near Broadway the night Allison vanished. Within days, half a dozen more people remembered the same thing. Detectives ran down every registered white van in Boone County, 12 in total. One belonged to an electrician, another to a bottled water company. All checked out. The van, like everything else, was a dead end. Still, people whispered about it for years. Fear has a way of outliving facts. The pressure from the media was relentless. Every morning brought a new headline, some careful, others cruel. One front page read, "Did the Mizzou student just walk away?" The community split in half. Some believed she'd been kidnapped. Others thought she'd left on her own. Her family sat for an interview on the local evening news. Her father's hands shook as he unfolded a photo of his daughter. "She was happy," he said. "She was making plans for graduate school." People don't plan their future if they're running away from it. Each night, their appeal replayed between commercials for car dealerships and football scores, slowly blending into the background noise of the city. As weeks turned into months, investigators cast their net wider. The Columbia Police Department brought in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to review the case. They re-interviewed anyone with a prior record of harassment or assault near campus. More than 40 names crossed their desks, none connected to Allison. 6 were labeled persons of interest. Within weeks, each one was cleared. One man, a janitor accused of harassing students in 2002, had an airtight alibi. Another, a homeless man who lived near the park, volunteered a DNA sample that came back clean. Every lead died faster than it was born. By December 2004, the FBI issued its official profile. No evidence suggests a planned or targeted crime. This appears to be a crime of opportunity, random, impulsive, and isolated. That one line shifted the entire focus of the case. Detectives stopped looking at people Allison knew and started hunting for strangers. But there was no DNA, No fingerprints, no witnesses left to question. The city had returned to normal life, but for investigators, the silence was deafening. By January 2005, the volunteer search teams had disbanded. The temporary budget funding overtime hours ran out. Only 2 detectives were left to manage the file. Each new call to the tip line brought the same thing: rumors, false memories, mistaken sightings. By February, the file was reclassified. Active, pending tips. A local paper summed it up in 5 words: 70 days. 0 evidence found. At home, the Pierce family refused to let the silence win. They turned their living room into a command center, maps covering the walls, each pin marking an area already searched. Her father highlighted routes in red marker, connecting points that no longer mattered. Her mother wrote letters every week to the police chief, pleading for updates. "Please," she wrote, "don't let her become a statistic." Inside the Columbia Police Department, Sergeant Dale Weston, the same investigator who had stood over the timeline board in those early hours, kept her file on his desk long after others moved on. Years later, he recalled that period with quiet resignation. When you've been in this job long enough, you can feel when a case still has air in it, and when it's dying. Allison's file never went cold for me. Every time I drove past those Broadway streetlights, I thought about that girl in the denim jacket, the one we couldn't bring home. By spring, the story had faded from the front page. Students returned to the same cafes and bus stops where she had walked that night. The same crosswalk signal blinked green over empty pavement. Columbia began to look alive again, but beneath the surface, something was missing. The case had stalled. The city had moved on. And yet, in the quiet corners of the police station, one thin file still sat waiting. Every suspect eliminated, every rumor spent, every lead gone. And as the years began to roll forward, the name Allison Pierce would drift from memory. Until the day someone would reopen that file and find what everyone had missed. But for now, in early 2005, it ended here. A town exhausted, a family broken, and an open case slowly sinking beneath the weight of time. It started with a change of labels, not a breakthrough. In early 2005, the Columbia Police Department reclassified the case file. Inactive unless new leads. A red sticker, "Pending Evidence," went on the front of the folder that carried Allison Pierce's name. Headlines shifted to other stories. The evening news stopped looping her photo. In the quiet of a records room, a stack of photos, a few grainy camera frames, and pages of notes were all that remained of a 22-year-old who vanished on a busy street. One young detective skimming the file for the first time said to no one in particular, "Every missing person has 2 deaths, one of the body, and one when people stop looking." He closed the folder, then opened it again. Her family refused to accept the silence. They kept Allison's room as it was. Textbooks lined up. Fall calendar still flipped to October 2004. A pen capped and waiting on the desk. Each morning her father started work late so he could send an email to Chief Weston for updates. Each message was respectful, brief, and ended the same way. "Please don't let this go." Her mother organized notes on the dining table and called other families of the missing. If the city's search slowed, she would create her own. "If they stopped looking, then I'll start," she told a local reporter. That sentence became the mission statement of a small nonprofit they founded, the Pierce Foundation, a volunteer group focused on keeping the names of missing students in public view and teaching families how to preserve evidence, log tips, and push for follow-ups without burning bridges. Columbia moved forward the way college towns do. New freshmen arrived. The coffee shops that saw Allison pass by filled with different faces. But every fall there was a pause, a thread that tugged at people who had been here long enough to remember. On October 15, 2006, 2 years to the day, students gathered on the quad with candles. No speeches, just a moment when you could hear the wind and the scrape of shoes. From then on, the annual vigil for Allison became a ritual. It got smaller each year, but it never disappeared. By 2007, the case transferred to the Missouri State Cold Case Unit. In that warehouse of unsolved files, Allison stood in a row of cardboard boxes, stamped with dates and city names. A detective would take it down, spread out the contents, maps with pen circles, transcripts of interviews, the service log from the cafe, and try to see what others had missed. After weeks, sometimes months, the box went back to the shelf. When Chief Weston retired in 2009, his handoff memo to the next administration was plain. Case remains unsolved. No new evidence. Recommend forensic preservation. It read like a bare promise. Keep what we have, someday it may matter. There were bursts of hope that went nowhere. In 2009, rumors pushed a narrative that a professor who taught Allison might be involved. It spread fast. It took longer to undo. Detectives checked schedules, interviewed colleagues, collected a DNA sample. Nothing fit. For the family, the rumor wasn't just false. It cut open old wounds. In 2012, a woman in Texas thought she saw Allison working at a roadside diner. A detective and a family friend flew down. The waitress looked like her in the eyes, and in the way she moved her hands when she talked. DNA ruled it out. The waitress apologized, said she wished she could help. The detective noted the moment in his report and flew back to Missouri. Science was catching up, but not fast enough to help. From 2010 to 2015, labs across the country adopted newer DNA techniques and, later, the early framework of forensic genealogy. But the physical evidence in Allison's case was scarce and fragile. The jacket had been stored properly, yet the technology to pull a usable profile from the smallest trace on worn denim simply wasn't there. Each time a method improved, technicians opened the sealed envelopes, evaluated, and sealed them again. A state lab analyst described it the simple way. "It's not that we forgot her. We just didn't have the tools to speak for her yet." The town tried to remember in its own way. In 2014, an old friend from campus raised money for a billboard on I-70. Drivers passing Columbia saw a large photo and 5 words, "Still missing, Allison Pierce." Underneath, 22 years old, Columbia, Missouri. The billboard stayed up for 4 years. When storms faded the print, volunteers replaced it. People honked as they passed. Most didn't know why. A few did. At home, her parents adjusted to life around an empty chair. They didn't move. They didn't change their phone number. They didn't pack away her books or donate her coat. On Allison's birthday, they set a small cake on the kitchen table and lit one candle. No songs, no speech, just a pause. Her mother wrote in a diary she kept for herself and maybe for Allison. People say time heals. For us, time only proves that justice hasn't arrived. Every 2 years, new eyes looked at the file. A detective fresh to the unit scanned the transcripts and paused at the bag tagged denim jacket. He looked up the chain of custody log. Everything was intact. Initial entry, lab check-ins, retaped dates, signatures, temperatures recorded. He stared at the bag a long time. "She looks like someone I knew in college," he said to the evidence tech. "It's strange to think people can disappear in front of us and the world keeps going." He had no way to know he would be in the room years later when the case finally moved again. For now he signed his note and filed it. No new, actionable evidence. The city's memory didn't vanish. It thinned. Reporters who had covered the early searches changed beats or switched stations. Students who once taped flyers on light poles graduated and moved away. The vigil on campus included more people who came out of respect than people who remembered standing there when it first happened. But the Pierce Foundation grew. Parents of other missing students called for advice. They learned how to request public records, how to push for a case review without turning the police into adversaries, how to keep a file alive with steady, documented outreach instead of public confrontation. The foundation sent out small checklist kits, guides on preserving phones, social media, and printed notes in those brutal first 72 hours that too often decide the fate of a case. Across law enforcement, policy moved in inches. Storage standards improved. Cold case units shared more with each other. But technology sat just behind the line in the Allison file. A sergeant in the state lab wrote a memo recommending that the denim be preserved for future low-copy long-range DNA approaches. The memo was dry, but it mattered. It codified patience. By the end of 2015, Allison's file was 11 years old. The Christmas after, her parents drove north on Providence Road, past the cafe, past the gas station where a witness once saw her glance back over her shoulder, past the corner that had filled with officers and students and flashing lights. They pulled over near Rock Bridge State Park and sat under a gray sky. They did not call the media. They did not talk about hope. They simply stayed until dusk. Back home, a message light blinked on their landline. It was a reporter asking if there were any updates. Her mother returned the call and said what she always said. "The trail may be cold, but our love isn't." That line later appeared on a small plaque in Rockbridge, placed by people who didn't want the story to be reduced to a case number. It wasn't a shrine. It was a reminder that a person had been here, that a family had waited here, that a town had once looked here and not found what it needed to find. There was no drama left in the file, only the weight of what wasn't there. No new suspect, no recovered video, no confession. Just phone logs, transcripts, maps, and a jacket carefully sealed by hands that wrote the date and time in black ink across clear tape. The investigation did not end. But it learned to move quietly, checking tips, logging dead ends, forwarding a rumor to the right department and closing it with a note when it led nowhere. A case can survive on that kind of steady work, even when attention fades. Years pass in an evidence room the same way they pass outside, box by box, label by label. A slow draft of air whenever a door opens and closes. The Allison Pierce case sat through winter and spring, through new detectives and retirements, through budget cycles that favored other priorities. It was not forgotten. It was waiting. What broke the silence later did not come from a confession, a chance encounter, or a dramatic discovery on a street camera. It seemed from the smallest traces, preserved in those sealed bags, and from science that finally learned how to listen to them. But that is beyond this chapter. For now, the story sits where it sat for most of a decade, an ordinary walk cut off by a gap in time, and a family that refused to let that gap become the end of the story. It had been 12 long years since anyone in Columbia, Missouri spoke the name Allison Pierce with hope. By 2016, her story had become a ghost of a headline, one of those college town mysteries that faded with time. Each October, the university still held a candlelight vigil, but attendance had dwindled from hundreds to a quiet circle of a few dozen. Police called it a case without movement. The town had moved on. That changed on a cold morning in November. A hiker taking a side trail through Rock Bridge Memorial State Park, 6 miles south of downtown Columbia, noticed something that didn't belong. At first, it looked like an old rag caught in the brush. Then he saw a small, pale shape protruding from the ground. When he brushed away the dirt, he realized it wasn't stone. It was bone. And beside it, half buried under leaves, was a torn leather wallet. Within 30 minutes, the park was sealed off. Columbia PD called the state crime lab, and by nightfall, the FBI's evidence response team was on site. The coordinates matched an area that had been searched in 2004, but never this far into the ridge. Inside the weathered wallet, investigators found an ID card from the University of Missouri. The name on it, Allison Pierce. Near the shallow grave lay a faded denim jacket, frayed at the cuffs and stiff from years of soil and rain. It was still intact enough to recognize. Detectives had seen that jacket before. It appeared in the last known photo of Allison leaving the Maple Bean Café on 9th Street the night she vanished. The discovery hit like a punch. The search that began 12 years earlier had finally ended, but not the way anyone hoped. The forensic team treated the scene with quiet precision. Every inch of soil was sifted, every fragment bagged. They recovered portions of a skull, ribs, pelvis, and scattered remains consistent with a young adult female. Dental charts from 2003 confirmed the identity, before the DNA test even came back. A week later, the lab made it official. A 100% genetic match with her mother, Linda Pierce. The medical examiner's report was clear. The skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma, 2 fractures caused by a heavy object. 3 ribs were broken, one with signs of impact before death. The pattern on her denim jacket suggested a struggle. There was no sign she'd been moved after death. She was attacked there, likely between the night of October 15th and the early hours of the 16th, 2004. For 12 years, the truth had been buried in the soil. When the results went public, Colombia erupted in emotion. Local stations broke the story within hours. Remains found near Colombia may belong to missing student. Once confirmed, national media followed. Reporters filled the same streets that once held search parties. At a brief press conference, Allison's parents stood side by side. Her father spoke softly. After 12 years, we finally know where she is. Now we need to know why. The same day, flowers covered the fence at Rock Bridge. Students, retired officers, and strangers came with candles and quiet tears. Columbia PD released a short statement. We are reopening every piece of evidence. The new investigation brought together Columbia PD, the Missouri State Police, and the FBI's Forensic Division. Their first step was to rebuild the entire 2004 timeline, hour by hour, camera by camera, witness by witness. But this time they had something tangible. A jacket, a burial site, and a cause of death. They started with the denim. It was carefully photographed, vacuum-sealed, and sent to the state lab in Jefferson City. The fibers were tested for organic residues and foreign DNA. In 2004, that would have been impossible. In 2016, the lab had new tools: laser capture microdissection, better trace recovery methods, and surface scanning microscopes that could lift fragments invisible to the naked eye. The jacket, once just a photo on a poster, had become a silent witness. But as the evidence went under the microscope, the town went under a spotlight. News crews from NBC, CNN, and Springfield News crowded Columbia's small press rooms. Online forums exploded with speculation that Allison had known her attacker, that it was a copycat case, or even that the original police search had covered up mistakes. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Columbia PD, remembering what had happened years earlier, stayed silent. In 2007, during a different missing person case in the same region, police had released premature details about a suspect vehicle, a white pickup, that turned out to belong to an innocent man. He was harassed for weeks, lost his job, and later filed a lawsuit. The backlash had taught the department a costly lesson. Once false information spreads, it never dies. This time, the chief ordered a total information lockdown. No suspect lists, no leaks, no speculation. We'll speak when the evidence does, he said. Behind the scenes, detectives combed through storage archives. Old binders marked Pierce Case 2004. They reopened sealed envelopes, reviewed photos, and checked logbooks from the first search. Every fragment of information was cross-referenced. The biggest question: had the killer been interviewed back then? Dozens of names resurfaced: classmates, co-workers, passers-by. But no immediate lead. Still, The tone had changed. This was no longer about a missing person. It was a homicide with physical evidence. And that meant one thing: DNA. While the investigation moved cautiously, Allison's family refused to retreat into grief. At the following vigil, Linda Pierce spoke again. Her voice was firm this time. "We prayed for answers, not closure. Closure means it's over, and this isn't." She meant it. The Pierce Foundation, which once helped other families of missing students, redirected all its funding to cold case DNA testing. Grants from that foundation later helped the Missouri State Lab upgrade its touch DNA and biosensor systems in 2020, a decision that would prove critical later. But in 2016, no one knew that yet. They just knew that science, for the first time, might have a chance. Columbia's people responded in kind. The cafe where Allison worked hosted a memorial night. Every dollar earned was donated to the State Forensic Lab Fund. Students at the University of Missouri built a wooden board on the quad that read, "Justice still has a name." Local businesses hung missing person flyers again, this time with the word "found" crossed in red above them, and the word "fighting" printed below. Some of the volunteers from 2004 returned to the same park trails where they had once searched with flashlights. Now older, parents themselves, they said they wanted to stand where the search had ended. One of them told a reporter, 12 years ago we were looking for her. Now we're looking for the truth." By December, investigators compiled a full report for the Missouri Attorney General's office. It included over 600 pages of re-examined evidence, timelines, and forensic recommendations. The final summary read simply, "Evidence sufficiently preserved for future DNA testing. Case remains active." That sentence carried quiet power. It didn't mean the case was solved, but it meant it was no longer cold. It meant that science might one day speak where silence had lived. The story of Allison Pierce didn't end with the discovery. It restarted there. Her remains had given back what years of rumor and despair had taken. Proof, not speculation. A reason to keep searching. And as Columbia prepared for another winter, a new message spread across the same online pages that once shared false leads. It read, "She's home now. But her story isn't over." From the soil of Rockbridge, Allison had finally come back. Not to rest, but to remind the world that the truth doesn't stay buried forever. And from that old denim jacket, from those last surviving fibers, science would soon speak for her louder than anyone else ever could. If you've followed Allison's story this far, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to keep her name alive. And comment below what you think finally turned this case around. Sometimes it's one detail. Sometimes it's one person who refuses to forget. By early 2020, the Allison Pierce case was still open. but no closer to an answer. 4 years had passed since her remains were found, and every possible lead had gone quiet again. Her file sat in the Missouri State Cold Case Unit marked active, pending evidence. Investigators checked in on it twice a year, hoping new technology might someday do what human eyes could not. That chance came in March 2020. The Missouri State Crime Lab received a full forensic upgrade, including a new system for touch DNA analysis, a technique capable of extracting genetic material from just a few skin cells. It meant that, even after years, a single trace on fabric could speak. When technician Rachel Moore opened the sealed evidence bag labeled Item Number 14, Denim Jacket, she paused. The jacket had been folded and stored since 2016, wrapped in acid-free paper. She studied the frayed cuffs, the worn collar, the faded blue still clinging to the fabric. "This one's been waiting to talk," she said quietly. Over the next week, the team conducted 5 rounds of micro-extraction. Under magnification, they found it. Faint, partial, but real. A male DNA trace embedded deep in the inner sleeve lining. It didn't match any technician, officer, or relative of the victim. The initial report was simple and cold. Low-copy male DNA recovered from inner sleeve lining. Possible contact transfer from assailant. The sample was immediately uploaded to CODIS, the National DNA Database. The result came back within hours. No match. Whoever had left that DNA was not in any criminal registry. Not in Missouri. Not anywhere in the United States. But technology had advanced in more ways than one. In September 2020, the Columbia Police Department approved a genetic genealogy search, the same method that had solved the Golden State Killer case. The idea was simple, but revolutionary. Use the DNA to find distant relatives, then build a family tree backward until a likely suspect emerged. The partial profile was sent to a specialized lab in Virginia. For 6 weeks, analysts cross-checked genetic patterns through civilian ancestry databases, tracing chromosomes across families that had never heard of the case. In early November, the report came back. There were 3 distant relatives connected to the DNA sample. 1 in Arkansas, 1 in Kansas, 1 in Illinois. Their branches converged on a single family line with Missouri roots. The surname at the top? Keller. Investigators began combing through Columbia's 2004 residence records. Within 2 miles of 9th Street, there was only one Keller listed. Thomas Allen Keller, 41 at the time of Allison's disappearance. A plumber. Divorced. Once cited for harassment of a female client, but the charge was dropped. Old files showed his name had appeared in the first round of interviews back in 2004. He'd been questioned briefly, then dismissed. The summary note from that interview contained just 2 lines. Cooperative. No visible injuries. Claims he was home watching football. His house then had been 1 block from Broadway, the same intersection where Allison was last seen alive. Detective David Raines, now heading the cold case team, ordered a full review of Keller's 2004 records. In doing so, they uncovered a detail no one had ever noticed. A late-night 911 call made by Keller himself on October 16, 2004, the night Allison vanished. He had reported seeing a woman wandering near Broadway Park around 10 p.m. The timing was chilling. Roughly 20 minutes after Allison's phone went dark. The call had never been linked to her case. Until now. For the first time in 17 years, the investigation had a name that fit both the timeline and the DNA. Keller was still alive. He was living in Springfield, Missouri, about 150 miles away, working small plumbing contracts. Detectives obtained a temporary warrant for discreet biological collection. For 2 months, they followed him quietly. At diners, gas stations, work sites, waiting for the right opportunity. One evening, officers retrieved a coffee cup Keller had thrown into a trash bin at a gas station. It was rushed to the lab, but the DNA quantity was too small to test. They waited again, patient and methodical. As one investigator later said, "After 17 years, what's a few more weeks?" While surveillance continued, the lab reanalyzed the original denim sample using newly enhanced sensitivity protocols. The result confirmed the DNA fragment was still viable and strong enough for direct comparison, if they could just obtain a clean sample from Keller. In briefings, the team often reflected on how far forensic science had come since the early 2000s. Back then, labs needed nearly a full nanogram of material, about 1,000 cells, to generate a profile. In 2020, they could do it with a fraction of one. A single skin cell, a bead of sweat, even a faint touch on fabric could be enough. As the Columbia police chief put it, if this technology had existed 15 years earlier, Allison's killer might never have seen another sunrise. By mid-November, word of a major forensic development leaked to the local press. Within hours, headlines screamed across Missouri. Breakthrough could solve Mizzou's coldest case. TV crews surrounded police headquarters. Journalists demanded names, details, timelines. The department said nothing. They had learned their lesson. In 2009, a St. Louis homicide unit had publicly identified a suspect in a similar missing student case, only for DNA to later prove the man innocent. The media storm ruined his life and derailed the real investigation for nearly a year. Columbia's detectives refused to repeat that mistake. Their spokesperson issued a single statement: "We will speak only when the science finishes the sentence." Inside the lab, work continued in silence. Technicians compared Keller's genealogical branch against the partial male profile from the jacket. Each test took weeks, each one more precise than the last. The first results showed a striking genetic overlap, close enough to suggest a near relative. It wasn't confirmation yet, but it narrowed the window. Detectives began assembling the paperwork for a warrant to collect Keller's direct DNA. Every step had to hold up in court. No shortcuts, no contamination, no room for error. In December 2020, the lab's preliminary report was sent to the Missouri Attorney General's office. It read, "High likelihood of shared ancestry between recovered DNA and Keller lineage. Recommend direct comparison." The team understood exactly what that meant. After nearly 2 decades of silence, the jacket that Allison wore the night she vanished had finally spoken. And it was pointing toward the man who'd once lived steps from where she disappeared. By January 2021, a renewed surveillance order was in place. Detectives tracked Keller's every movement, waiting for another chance to collect discarded DNA. One item, one sip, one careless toss, that could close the loop forever. The case file's final entry that winter was short. Awaiting direct sample collection. Anticipate result by early May. 17 years after Allison Pierce left the Maple Bean Café, the fabric she wore that night had done what no one else could. It had whispered a name the world had overlooked for too long. And soon, that whisper would become proof. If you've been following this story, stay with it, because the moment that DNA met its match would change everything. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe no case should ever be too old for justice. And tell us in the comments what you think this breakthrough means for every family still waiting for answers. By February 2021, the investigation into the disappearance of Allison Pierce entered its final, quiet stretch. Not of surrender, but of precision. Detectives in Columbia, Missouri, working with the Springfield Police Department, began a full-time surveillance operation on Thomas Allen Keller, the man whose DNA had surfaced through genetic genealogy. Keller was 58. He lived alone in a small one-story home on the outskirts of Springfield, still working occasional plumbing jobs. He had no criminal record, no recent traffic violations, and no family ties nearby. His old interview file from 2004 described him in one line: known in area, socially isolated. Every morning he followed the same pattern, leaving home at 6:45 a.m., driving an aging silver Ford Ranger with no GPS or dash cam, stopping for coffee at the same gas station. To the public, he was invisible. To investigators, he was the last missing piece in a 17-year puzzle. One detective later said, "It wasn't a chase. It was a waiting game." For weeks they tracked his movements and gathered discarded items. Then, in early March, a break. Keller stopped at a rest area along Route 60, drank from a plastic water bottle and tossed it into a trash can. Within minutes, the surveillance team retrieved it and delivered it to the Missouri State Crime Lab. On March 12, 2021, the results came back. Male DNA recovered from bottle matches 100% with profile extracted from victim's denim jacket. The internal memo had only 2 bolded words: confirmed match. Inside the Columbia Police Department, no one spoke at first. Years of frustration seemed to compress into a single breath. Detective David Rains, who had led the cold case unit for nearly a decade, finally exhaled and said quietly, "We finally have him." Within hours, every surviving member of the original 2004 task force was notified. Some were retired, some working in other departments. They gathered in the briefing room where Allison's case board had once stood. A former investigator recalled later, "You could hear the silence change, from grief to purpose." The classification on the file was officially updated from active cold case to active homicide, DNA confirmed suspect. On March 14th, Rains and his team presented their findings to the Boone County Prosecutor's Office. The evidence package was airtight. The recovered water bottle, the denim jacket, Keller's 2004 interview transcript, and the genetic genealogy report linking him to the family line that surfaced in 2020. At 6:20 a.m. on March 16, 2021, a judge signed the warrant for search and arrest. Columbia PD and the FBI agreed to keep it sealed until the operation was complete. Not even the Pierce family was told. Secrecy mattered more than ceremony. 3 days later, before dawn on March 19th, a small tactical team approached Keller's house. The street was quiet. When they knocked, Keller opened the door within seconds. He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He simply said, "I figured this day would come." The search of his home was brief but revealing. In a cardboard box under the bed, officers found several newspaper clippings from 2004, all about Allison Pierce's disappearance. In a drawer, they discovered a notebook filled with work locations around the Broadway corridor, the same route Allison had walked that night. A rusted pocket knife was recovered and sent for testing, though it later showed no trace of blood. But the most chilling find was small and simple: a laminated newspaper photo of Allison, cut out from an old Missing Student Columbia article. The image was creased, faded, and carried signs of being handled over and over again. 2 days later, Detective Raines and an FBI liaison drove to the Pierce family home to deliver the news in person. Allison's mother, Linda Pierce, sat quietly as they explained what the DNA had confirmed. When Raines handed her the official report, she asked only one question. "Are you sure?" He nodded. She studied the page, then said softly, "Then she can rest now." The family requested privacy and asked that Keller's name not be released publicly until the formal indictment was filed. They didn't want the case jeopardized by media noise. Still, word spread quickly through law enforcement channels, and on May 21, 2021, the Boone County prosecutor held a short press conference. After 17 years, DNA technology has identified Thomas Allen Keller as the suspect responsible for the abduction and death of Allison Pierce. No details were given about motive or evidence. The statement lasted less than 2 minutes. That was all it took. Within hours, every major network carried the headline, "DNA solves 17-year-old Mizzou mystery." Reporters revisited every milestone: the cafe footage, the vigils, the discovery in Rockbridge Park. To the public, the story had come full circle. Neighbors of Keller began to speak up. One told police, "He used to join the volunteer searches when that girl went missing." Another recalled, "He brought coffee for the crews looking along the river." Others described small but telling memories: how Keller abruptly sold his Columbia home a few months after Allison vanished, how he refused to drive past the university afterward, how he would turn off the TV whenever her photo appeared. Each detail added a layer to the same haunting realization. The man who'd helped search for Allison Pierce had been standing in plain sight all along. By late May, Boone County prosecutors filed 2 charges: first-degree murder and kidnapping resulting in death. The case file was now a thick binder of documents: DNA reports, chain of custody records, interview transcripts, and forensic certifications proving that every piece of evidence had remained uncontaminated for 17 years. The Missouri State Crime Lab submitted a 146-page technical report that would serve as the backbone of the state's case. Every test, every swab, every sealed envelope was accounted for, logged, and verified. The precision left no room for reasonable doubt. The court scheduled Keller's first appearance for June 9, 2021, at the Boone County Courthouse. He was transferred from Springfield under heavy escort and held without bail. When asked for a plea, he gave none. For the investigators, the moment was both victory and burden. They had waited almost 2 decades for this name to surface, and now, as they watched the suspect they'd hunted for half their careers sit in a county cell, the emotion was quieter than expected. One of them said later, It didn't feel like celebration. It felt like finally exhaling. Back in Columbia, the cold case unit updated the wall where Allison's photo had hung since 2004. Beneath it, a new label was printed in red. Case reopened. DNA confirmed. 17 years earlier, Thomas Keller had slipped through the cracks, but science had caught up. The same jacket that disappeared into the dark had carried his name the whole time. It had just taken the right decade to reveal it. For those who had never stopped searching, this was more than an arrest. It was proof that time doesn't erase evidence. It only waits for technology to catch up. If you've been following this story, share it. Because when persistence meets science, even the quietest case can find its voice again. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Do you believe every mystery can still be solved, no matter how many years have passed? By June 2022, the courthouse in Boone County filled with a quiet kind of tension. 17 years after Allison Pierce vanished from a college street in Columbia, Missouri, her name returned. Not on a flyer, but on a court docket. State of Missouri versus Thomas Allen Keller. The prosecution opened with one undeniable fact. The DNA match between Keller and the sample recovered from Allison's denim jacket was absolute, a 1 in quadrillion probability of error. The forensic chain had survived nearly 2 decades, through every evidence transfer and lab upgrade. It was the science that time could not erase. Keller sat motionless as the prosecutor recounted the sequence of discovery. The 2020 touch DNA test, the 2021 water bottle collection, the 100% match, and the items found in his home, the clippings, the notebook, the laminated photo. Each piece fit like a thread connecting past and present. The defense offered only 2 strategies. First, they argued contamination, that the DNA could have been transferred accidentally, by a technician or by indirect contact years ago. Second, they leaned on Keller's age and mental state, calling him a man confused by time and circumstance. But none of it held weight against the forensic evidence. The prosecution brought in expert witnesses from the Missouri State Crime Lab, who walked the jury through every step of the testing process. They showed the lab logs, chain of custody forms, and photographic evidence of sealed samples. Each test had been documented, time-stamped, and verified by multiple analysts. The courtroom listened as a forensic specialist explained how even a few skin cells from the inside of Allison's jacket sleeve could reveal the truth after 17 years. Then came the behavioral evidence. A former co-worker testified that Keller avoided driving near the university after 2004 and changed jobs abruptly within months of Allison's disappearance. A neighbor recalled how he joined volunteer search teams that same year. "He even brought us coffee," she said. The irony settled heavily across the room. Another witness remembered Keller's unease when Allison's case appeared on television. He'd switch the channel right away. He couldn't stand seeing her face, the man said. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Keller was not a random bystander. He lived steps away from where Allison was last seen. He had the opportunity, the proximity, and the knowledge of the search area. And his DNA, found exactly where she had struggled, closed the circle. When it was the defense's turn, their strategy shifted again. They claimed secondary transfer, that Keller's DNA might have been deposited during his plumbing work around town. But prosecutors countered swiftly, reminding the jury that the DNA was found inside the inner sleeve of the victim's jacket, an area unlikely to have been touched by anyone except her and her attacker. Over 2 weeks, the courtroom replayed 17 years of pain and persistence through testimony, evidence, and science. Reporters from national outlets filled the back rows, documenting a case that had become a symbol of what modern forensics could do for the forgotten. On the final day, Linda and Robert Pierce took the stand for their victim impact statement. They didn't speak about vengeance or anger. Linda looked directly at Keller and said, "We prayed for answers, not punishment. But we'll take both if it means she's no longer a headline." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge paused before dismissing them. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson stood and read a single word that echoed across the room. "Guilty." Keller showed no reaction as the judge pronounced the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The official cause: murder in the first degree and kidnapping resulting in death. For the first time since 2004, the Pierce family allowed themselves to cry. Reporters noted the quiet applause from the back rows, investigators, forensic analysts, and volunteers who had once searched along the Missouri River. As the courtroom emptied, one of the detectives whispered, "Justice delayed, but not denied." Outside, rain began to fall lightly on the courthouse steps. The kind of Missouri rain that lingers, steady and unshowy. Reporters waited for a statement, but the family declined. Instead, the prosecutor read a short message on their behalf. "We are grateful to the men and women who refused to stop looking. Allison's story proves that truth doesn't fade with time. It waits to be found." The trial's conclusion made headlines nationwide. True crime podcasts and legal experts dissected the case as a textbook example of how forensic genealogy could rewrite the rules of cold case investigation. Law enforcement agencies across the U.S. cited the Pierce case in new training materials, noting how evidence preservation and interagency coordination had made the 2021 breakthrough possible. But inside Missouri, the tone was quieter. For the people who had known Allison, her classmates, co-workers, the baristas who once shared late shifts, it wasn't about science or history. It was about closure, a circle finally drawn to its end. In Columbia, students gathered at the same campus quad where candlelight vigils had been held 17 years earlier. They held photos of Allison, not as a missing person, but as a reminder of what persistence can achieve. As one volunteer said to a local reporter, "We didn't find her in 2004, but we never stopped walking that street in our minds. Tonight, we finally reached the other side." Inside the Boone County Courthouse, the evidence boxes were resealed and labeled, "Resolved, retain for record." The last entry in the case file read simply, "Verdict delivered. Sentence imposed. Investigation concluded." 17 years, thousands of hours, and one tiny piece of fabric had brought the case full circle. Allison Pierce's story, once a mystery whispered across Columbia, had become a lesson written into Missouri's legal history. If you've followed this far, take a moment to share her story. Because in the end, persistence and science don't just catch killers. They give names back to the lost.
Like, subscribe, and comment below if you believe that every unanswered case still deserves a voice, no matter how many years it takes to be heard. When the verdict was read, life in prison without parole, the courtroom fell silent. 17 years of waiting had come down to a single sentence. As the Pierce family walked out of the Boone County Courthouse, Linda Pierce said just one thing to the reporters waiting outside. Justice took time, but it found its way. Across Missouri, headlines echoed the same words. DNA solves 17-year-old cold case. The story of Allison Pierce wasn't just another true crime headline anymore. It was a milestone in forensic history. Proof that science, patience, and persistence could outlast time itself. In the months that followed, the case became a teaching tool. The Missouri State Police and KBI released a detailed 200-page report breaking down every step of the investigation, from evidence preservation in 2004 to the genetic genealogy breakthrough in 2020. The report became required reading at the University of Missouri's Law and Criminology programs under a new course called Justice Through Science. In classrooms across the state, instructors held up Allison's case as a turning point, an example that even a faded piece of denim could one day tell a story the world had forgotten. Touch DNA, once a new idea, was now a standard protocol. What had begun as tragedy was now changing how detectives were trained to think. By November 2022, the ripple reached the state capitol. Missouri's governor signed the Cold Case Innovation Act, a reform package mandating the long-term preservation of evidence and funding advanced DNA testing in every regional lab. The bill, unofficially called the Pierce Bill, required every unsolved missing person case to retain biological samples for a minimum of 50 years. 10 labs were upgraded, hundreds of cases reopened, and a statewide data-sharing network was built to prevent evidence from ever being lost again.
For the Pierce family, reform wasn't enough. They wanted to turn their daughter's story into something that helped others directly. They restructured their old search fund into the Pierce Foundation for Victim Advocacy, an organization that funds cold case testing, provides grants to families of missing persons, and trains volunteers to recognize early signs of disappearance risk. Each year, the foundation awards 5 Justice Never Sleeps scholarships to law and forensic students who show promise in victim advocacy. The impact spread beyond Missouri. In 2023, the U.S. Department of Justice expanded its National Genetic Genealogy Program, citing the Pierce case as a model of interagency cooperation. 15 states soon followed, reopening long-dormant files using the same technology. Some introduced evidence preservation for families systems, allowing relatives of victims to track updates through secure online dashboards. From one solved case, a new national standard was born: justice through data. But with progress came debate. Privacy advocates questioned the growing use of genealogical databases in criminal investigations. Could solving crimes justify collecting civilian DNA? Linda Pierce answered simply, "My daughter's story isn't about exposure. It's about closure." That statement shaped legislation in multiple states requiring court orders for all genealogy-based searches. It balanced privacy with justice, ensuring that science remained a tool of truth, not intrusion. Back in Columbia, life moved forward, but the memory never left. Every October 15th, the day Allison disappeared, hundreds of people gather for the Allison Pierce Memorial Walk. They carry candles and sunflowers along the streets she once walked. At Rock Bridge State Park, a bronze plaque marks the place her story was found. It reads, "Justice for Allison, and for those still waiting." For the Columbia Police Department, her name became more than a memory. The department built a training program for new recruits centered around the Pierce case. The title of the lesson, "Preserve Everything. Time will find its use." Every cadet now learns how evidence handling, chain of custody, and meticulous record-keeping can change the future. The Pierce Protocol, once just good practice, became official state policy. Within 2 years, Missouri reported a 43% increase in reopened cold cases. Detective David Raines, now retired, said it best. "Her case taught us that patience solves more crimes than pressure ever will." Nationally, the story took on a second life. True crime podcasts, documentaries, and TV specials told the case again and again, not for the horror, but for the endurance. Dateline, 48 Hours, and Netflix all produced their own versions. The 2024 documentary The Last Walk, the Allison Pierce case, became one of the most watched true crime releases of the year. It was praised as the case that made America believe in cold case science again. But what stayed with viewers wasn't the crime. It was the idea that determination and technology could meet halfway across time to bring the truth home. In 2025, at the annual memorial event, Linda Pierce stood before the crowd of students, officers, and neighbors who had kept her daughter's memory alive. She said quietly, "If science can bring truth to light, then love keeps it shining." Then she handed a framed plaque to the Columbia Police Department. It read, "Don't close it. Reopen it." That phrase is now engraved in the marble hallway of Missouri's Cold Case Division, a reminder to every investigator that justice doesn't expire. Because justice doesn't live in the past. It lives in the people who refuse to give up, in the detectives who reopen boxes, in the labs that retest evidence, in families who never stop asking. It waits, patiently, until the truth finds its moment to speak. And when it does, it doesn't whisper. It speaks clearly, through science, through time, through faith. If this story moved you, share it. Like, subscribe, and comment below if you believe that justice has no expiration date. And tell us what other story you think still deserves to be heard.